Hi, in this episode we are going to see how closure is used in a very widely used pattern called module pattern in JavaScript. So we'll start with a function called counter. So var counter is equal to function. And before we go ahead and build this function, what we want to do is we want to see how it will be used. So the way it will be used is initially we'll say console.log counter.value. So this should print the value on the console, and then we should be able to do counter.increment. Let's increment it 3 times, and then we can print the value again, and then we should decrement it once, and then we should print the value. So this is our API. This is what we need to build. So counter is going to be a function, and then that function needs to have these things. So here one of the issues that we have is that counter has to have some kind of closure. So we can start with this, and then we can have var private counter is equal to 0, and then the function change by. So this is the value we are going to change by, and we are going to change, and then we can put private counter plus equal to val. Okay, so this is good. However, we need to have 3 public methods: value, increment, and decrement. So what we are going to do is this function is going to return an object, and that object will have these properties. So increment to be a function. We will fill in the function very soon, and it's going to have the property decrement function, and then the third property is value function. So in the increment, what we need to do is we need to do change by 1. So here we are incrementing it by 1, but you can imagine this being a very complicated business logic. Change by -1, and this will just return private counter. So let's try it. Undefined is not a function, so looks like okay. So what we need to do is we need to wrap the whole thing inside an iffy. Clear, run with JS, and we get the value 0, 3, and 2. So this code is working. Now let's look at the code again. So there are a few things going on here. So the first thing is that we run the whole thing through an iffy, because we create this anonymous function, and then we invoke it immediately. So because of that invocation, it returns this. So let's look at what it's returning. It is returning a pure simple JavaScript object, and that object has 3 properties: increment, decrement, and value, and these 3 are functions, and these functions are in turn invoking another function which is outside the scope of this function. So this is where it's creating closure. It is invoking a function which is outside it, and that function in turn is referring to a variable. So these variables are not part of these functions, so hence there is a closure. The good thing about this pattern, which is called a module pattern, is that it is able to hide all the private helper functions over here. So programming languages like Java and Ruby, there we have this concept of private methods and public methods. In JavaScript, we don't have quite those kind of semantics, private and public, but using this module pattern, we are able to mimic that kind of behavior. So anything above the return is private. Once we have invoked counter, there is absolutely no way to get to those variables or to get to those functions. So the only way we can work with is whatever we return, and in returning the object with the properties, we are going to return the functions which are the public functions. That's about this episode. I will see you next time. Thank you very much.